Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is September 28, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Keith Bowers. Keith, where in the heck you calling in from?
Corvallis, Oregon, the Beaver State.
How cool is that? The first question is, what's the best thing for a human being?
Best thing for a human being. I would have to say compassion.
What a great word. I like that. It's got a secret to it too. Words evoke more in their meaning. Compassion. You can split it up into a verb and a noun.
Right. And it sort of suggests we're all in this together and we're all the same thing.
Really good. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
I've always learned best visually. One of my creative expressions is writing, and the way that I learned to write was by sentence diagrams. So, and when I write or edit, I still see things visually. Like I'll see phrases, for example, as blocks of things that I can move around. And in various jobs, I've kept different kinds of records, spreadsheets or whatnot, and I color code the heck out of everything. So I'm a very visual learner. That's how I like to see information.
I like that. Color coding seems like it could be used so much more.
Mm-hmm.
For all these devices people plug in, it goes either this way or that way. Well, just have a red dot on each, and you go red dot to red dot. How easy? That's like get it. That's like what? So I do it with tape. I do color coding with tape all the time.
I've done that too. Yeah.
Like, why struggle with a chord twice when you could do it in one swoop? So
right.
So why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think it's a survival strategy, but I think that probably underlies the need to understand what's going on around us. That not only helps us survive, but helps us improve as individuals and as a people. I think collecting information, that's the beginning of record keeping. That's the beginning of science. It's the beginning of literature.
Yeah. Is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
I think it's innate. That's definitely, I think, what underlies it. That's that probably even precedes language, because one would need to collect certain information to know about threats or potential benefits surrounding them.
Do thoughts create emotions?
I think, well, yes, they certainly can. They certainly can. And vice versa as well.
Yeah. Is thinking more innate or more invented?
I don't know. I believe I believe ways to think are learned. So I would have to go with invented, because I think the right brain, intuition and connection to something outside oneself, I think that's more innate, whereas thinking is more of a higher mind thing.
Fill in the blank, Keith. I don't know what I think until I
put it in writing. Write about it to myself or discuss it. So, and I've been I also do visual art, and I'm learning music, but I've been a writer for a long time, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. But when you're a writer, until you've written something down, it's like it hasn't happened. Until you've reflected on it and sort of gone over it and analyzed it to yourself anyway, it's like it never happened.
Cool. That's the two examples I usually give is McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan
Hmm.
Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
Write it. Yeah.
So you covered both of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Can humans think without language?
Definitely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm just thinking of certain things that one doesn't need language for, but also, I've read authors like Oliver Sacks and uh, uh, people who suffer some kind of traumatic brain injury where they lose language. You know, can they still think? I probably yes. Do they think in words? I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think definitely there are thoughts that aren't just, you know, I'm hungry. It's like, I want a hot dog. You can see a hot dog. You don't have to have the word uh, to think that.
Yeah. And then are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings? I know it's a stupid question, it's both, but just your hunch or any thoughts.
I think we are a fascinating mix of the two. I recently my wife was out of town for a few days, and so I watched the whole Carl Sagan Cosmos series.
Yeah.
Uh, Again, I got it on DVD a few years ago, and sometimes I take it out and watch it again. And in the one that he describes the development of the brain from the brain stem, and then the limbic system, and then whatever is in the middle, and then the higher mind, he identified that as an uneasy truce within us. And I thought that is, it's it's a point of endless fascination. Some would say it's maddening because, what are we? Are we animals? Are we higher beings? Whatever. We're both. We're both.
That's good. And the Sagan word was Truce.
Yeah, I believe that's what he said. There is an
Yeah.
uneasy truce within us because we have this lizard brain, which I learned is called lizard brain for a reason. I don't remember what that reason was. Uh, but the brain stem, the limbic system, which houses the emotions, and then the higher mind, that they don't always play well together.
Yeah. Chomsky says that language is not just words, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Keith, what do you do when language doesn't work, when language breaks down?
Well, there's a million applications for that, but the first thing that comes to mind intuitively is art and music.
Yeah.
Uh, and there's also something to be said for action. For example, over the years, I was fortunate when I was young and I was a reporter. I got to observe closely a lot of people who I covered on beats, and a lot of that was in public service early in my career. And I got to see people whose behavior was just exemplary, and they would not say what they were doing or pontificate about how things ought to be done. They would do them, and I would observe, and I would say, "This is a great way to be." So that transcends language, although language is probably a good
Yeah.
part of whatever they were doing.
Well, that's actions speak louder than words.
It is, yes.
Yeah. Two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Thinking a function of the soul. I would have to say yes.
Yeah. The second Turing is, can machines think?
I sure hope not.
Right.
And the reason I say that is there are those who can pretty convincingly explain why machines can think, or why they will be able to, or that perhaps they already are.
Yeah.
I believe, though, that if an artificial creation gains self-awareness and the kind of consciousness that we have, it won't necessarily be like an iRobot, situation that, Asimov wrote about in his book. But at least I believe that was Asimov. But I just think there will be many, many, many unintended consequences that we didn't foresee. Ethical quandaries, and I don't know if you watched the redux of Battlestar Galactica a few years ago, but it's essentially about a race of robots that I believe humans have created that are at war with humans, and the war is not the part that I would necessarily fear, but there are all these quandaries, all of these, like, what if you're married to a robot and you didn't know she was a robot? What if there are duplicates of robots and you make love to one robot thinking it's your wife and it's not, it's somebody else? All kinds of, and well, one reason I thought that series was brilliant is because it portrayed these quandaries, and it wasn't just an us against them, 1980s US versus Russia kind of, diametrically opposed. It's how much we had in common, and how complicated it can make so many things.
Yeah. It's well put, man. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I more pursue meaning, but I wish sometimes I could let go and just pursue happiness. It's not to say I never do, but I wish I could. I wish I could more. I'm the type where when I have a day off, it's like, okay, I want unstructured time starting now, that kind of thing.
I want unstructured time starting now. That is so good. That's I'm trying to get more control over my spontaneity.
Yeah, right.
Or as my mom taught me, God, give me patience and give it to me now.
Now, yes.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it?
Well, I have an answer, but I will preface it by saying there are reasons to believe, and there are experiences that I've had that would lead one to believe that the brain creates consciousness. When I was about 20 years old, living in San Francisco, I had a motorcycle crash and suffered a moderately severe head injury. And a moderately severe head injury is worse than I would wish on anyone. And there were things that happened to me physically that affected my thoughts, that affected my emotions, that affected just how I saw, how I interacted with myself and the world. And then, fast forward a few decades, the few years before my mom died, she suffered from dementia, and she changed as a person, and so things were happening in her mind that were changing consciousness. I mean, you can argue all day long about whether the real her was still in there or not.
Yeah.
Perhaps it was, I don't know. But my answer is, I believe the brain translates consciousness. That perhaps somehow consciousness exists, and those physical effects that I just talked about would still have the same effect if they are translating.
Yeah.
But perhaps they're just muddying or getting in the way or rerouting,
that is a great word. See, what I'm after in these interviews is how to reword my questions, substitute verbs in the question. I was going to change that. Does the human more detect or create consciousness? Does the mind more? Does the body more? And so I've left it brain because that's what I've been saying all along. But, I like you change it. Does the brain more translate consciousness or create it? So I love that. Feel free. That's what this is about, is like me and you are working on the questions.
Yeah.
It's like they're not set, and it's funny. So what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Depends on how many martinis I've had the night before.
That is a unique answer. I've never had that.
If you want me to answer that literally, I will, but or you can just leave it at that.
No, your choice, because I'd say that's the best answer I could get, but
Yeah. Well, I think if you're going to be literal about how quickly something travels and not figurative, brain impulses are probably similar, if not exact, the speed of light. However, I believe a thought would take longer because sometimes, like we were just talking about, I don't know
yeah,
what I think until
blind.
so
Yeah,
light knows no boundaries. Light is like I'm unless it's at the front door of a black hole. You know,
yeah.
if light goes here to there, it doesn't have to go, wait a minute, should I go this way or should I go that way or should I go this way? So I would say
That's good.
equal if you're being
Yeah.
literal.
Oh, equal is great. It's like you're anthropomorphizing light.
Yes.
It's like, dude, I know what I'm doing. So this is Audre Lorde, the poet. You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded, said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
Well, I don't know if this is a new tool, but what I've found in my own life, uh, and what I've also know about history and have seen in certain movements is a combination of patience and perseverance.
Yeah.
You know, I think about, for example, the civil rights movement in this country, and then I think about Gandhi leading India and eventually Pakistan out of the British Empire. Um, there's a scene in the film Gandhi where person after person after person, Indian people come up against these British people, and they all have sticks, and they just they get hit by the sticks, and they walk to the back of the line and take it again. It's
Oh,
patience and perseverance because that's the tools they had at hand. You know,
wow.
perhaps it wouldn't have gone so well if they had weapons to match their colonialists. But patience and perseverance, I've found, has paid off um, for myself in situations and in history.
Great words, Keith. Really inspiring. So, what new toy do you suggest?
New toy. Well, I got a new toy recently, and when I say recently, I mean a few months ago. Uh, and it's been my favorite one. It's a black and chrome Gretsch G5120 hollow body electric guitar. I'm
Wow.
learning I'm learning electric guitar. I play a little bit of rock and blues harmonica, and I just sort of accidentally happened upon this desire to play guitar, and I was looking for something cheap, and this just came in front of me, and somebody was selling it locally, and I did about a month of research in 24 hours, and so that's a beautiful thing. That's my toy. Perhaps not everyone's favorite toy, but it certainly has given me a lot of solace.
Love them both, man. Guitar and harmonica, two of my faves.
Yeah.
What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
When I was a young reporter, I had the opportunity to interview Benjamin Hooks, the civil rights leader. He actually appeared here in Corvallis, and I was a reporter in Corvallis in the 1990s, and I moved back about 6 years ago. At any rate, I asked him, what do you want to be remembered for? And Benjamin Hooks said that to be remembered, Benjamin Hooks did the best he could with what he had. What I'm concerned about when I go to sleep is that I've not done the best, whether I've done the best I could with what I
Yeah.
had. It could be a past recrimination. It could be something coming up in the future. It could be something that
Yeah.
just my mind won't turn loose. But that's often what it comes down to.
Yeah. That's pretty universal. I think a lot of people feel that way. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the intent of the race. And by artists, I mean painters, reporters, musicians, artists as the intent of the race are broadcasting, and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can learn to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So, Keith, I asked you the question McLuhan probed his whole career. Why do we humans ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
I might say that we as a people, not all of us, ignore them, but we have so many sources of information, and there are sources of information running counter to what artists say, that we don't always choose to pay attention. There's also the concept of, uh, not to put too deep a point on it, but the archetypal hero. The imagine the artist as the hero. Imagine as the artist as the person or people um, broadcasting this truth. Just because it's good for people doesn't mean they want to hear it. It doesn't mean they want to believe it. It doesn't mean, and even if they do, they'll often turn on the hero and say, "We're done with you. Get out of here. You've brought us nothing but pain. You know, why'd you have to tell us that?" This kind of thing. So a short answer would be because people don't want to hear it.
Yeah, they don't want to hear it. It's like if you interpret the Wizard of Oz as the Wizard of Us in like McLuhan terms, Toto is the atomic dog, is the artist, because artists are pulling the curtain away. But what when you pull the curtain away, what are we revealing? They go, "Hey, pay no attention." Don't pay attention to this. That was good. I like that. You brought up sensory overload in a way too, without saying it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's true. It's especially today. I mean, I don't spend a lot of time in social media, and I'm not as intertwined with um, uh, uh, the internet and all the pervasive stuff as many people are. But I still find it difficult. I find it difficult to read long. My attention span is not what it used to be.
yeah,
So yeah, it's hard, even for those of us trying to stay aware.
yeah. Do artists have moral obligation?
My short answer is no, because if you think about, first of all, morality is to an extent subjective. So you think about somebody like James Joyce. James Joyce was exiled for what he wrote, right?
Yeah,
He went against Ireland, and Ireland kicked him out, and Ireland said, "We don't want you." Of course, Ireland embraced him years later. Think about somebody like Karen Finley or Robert Mapplethorpe, going to war against Jesse Helms and the NEA.
yeah.
Uh, they, if they had a moral obligation, they wouldn't have done the art and performance they did, and they wouldn't have gotten in trouble with the federal government. So in that regard, no, art's job sometimes is to blow the lid off morality to show hypocrisy or a different way of doing things.
Dude, you are a smart guy. I really appreciate how you worded it because it's like Astor Piazzolla. It's a little different, but he fucked up the tango.
Mm.
It's like if somebody fucked up rock and roll, like the Residents. Yeah,
Yes,
I know you
yes,
love the Residents. Thank God they fucked up rock and roll, but they didn't get blackballed. They became they're a major business for over 50 years. And
yeah.
in a way, I look up to them. They're my
Oh,
heroes in so many ways. But Astor Piazzolla messed with the tango form. They would beat him up on the
mhm.
streets in Argentina. And then eventually you go, dude, can we sell coffee mugs? They didn't even ask. Can we sell coffee mugs of your face and, toilet paper and like they did to Joyce? It's like now we
Yeah,
can cash in on this.
yeah.
Yeah, we could do a whole salon on the Residents someday. I don't want to get too off on that, but
Oh
how
boy.
how about How about Ronaldo and the loaf?
Oh yeah,
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 oh I turned this new experimental filmmaker onto that, and she freaked out.
oh
She
yeah.
just thought, "I didn't know this sort of thing existed." Even in the midst of YouTube, this is still like,
Yeah,
"Whoa."
yeah, yeah. I read the I don't remember who the author is, but the extensive biography of the residents, and read descriptions of when they were filming Violence Fast, and it just went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and the movie was going to last like 24 hours and all this stuff. It's just, yeah. And when you see the remaining footage of that stuff, it's like, what were you thinking? Why were you thinking it? And
Yeah,
how can I get in on it?
yeah, highly advanced. One thing I loved is when one of the residents died, he got an obit in the New York
New York
Times.
Times, Hardy
And
Fox. It was a,
it said,
yeah,
allegedly one of the residents.
yep, yep,
That's proof that dude succeeded as an artist.
yep, absolutely, absolutely.
Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Well, just taking a short survey of some of the ideas I'm afraid of, they're new, but they're also old. So I would say that being new or old is not uh, a qualifier for something that makes an idea worthy of fear.
Yeah, this is two quotes I use sometimes with this question. Cage said, "I can't understand why people are frightened with new ideas. I'm frightened with the old ones." And then the guy who invented the intermittent windshield wiper, Charles Kettering. People are very open-minded about new things, as long as they're exactly like the old
The
ones.
old things.
Keith, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
what I've what I've long thought of as my earliest memory is really not very interesting. But a couple of memories that aren't that far away from that. I remember my dad's family is from Tennessee, and I remember visiting an uncle. I couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 years old, and he had uh, probably a 1965 or 66 royal blue Mustang, and it was a convertible. And I remember watching that convertible top go down, and then we took a ride in that car on a summer night, and it was just unbelievable. So that's the and another is I don't remember where we were going or who we were seeing, but I grew up as a Navy kid, so I moved a lot. So there was a chance that I was traveling or flying to see family somewhere. But my mom and I being on a commercial flight when I probably was not older than 2, 3, and going up in the plane and looking down and seeing clouds and just looking down and think, this cannot be real. This
Yeah.
airplane cannot go higher than the clouds. In fact, later in my life, I thought that was a made up memory because I didn't travel by air for a while. And then when I did again, I'm like, no, there you are. It's real.
Amazing. That's a great McLuhan joke. The kid says to his dad when they get on the airplane, "When do we get smaller?"
uh,
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
it certainly can be either, but I think it's more of a blessing. It gives us the ability to remember things that you know places we've been and times of our life that are gone. Also, the people that we've lost that we don't know anymore or who aren't with us anymore. Uh, it also gives us the ability to take inventory and look back and be our own little science experiments in terms of our behavior. See what we've done, why we've done it, how we can connect it to something. I've done a lot of that in my life, and like I've kept journals probably since I was in middle school, and I still have the ones. Everything I've written in a journal since I was 16. And there have been times in my life when I've just gone back through and read them, and certain connections that I can make now that I couldn't make when I was 20, when I was 25, when I was 30, even 40. Memory, I know that strictly speaking, journals aren't memory, but having the ability to look back and detect patterns and learn more about ourselves.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Well, as I said, I was a Navy kid, and if you've ever seen the film or read the book, The Great Santini,
Yes.
that was essentially my life story. My dad was that kind of a narcissistic tyrant. So a counter to him in my life was my mom. Uh, she was among the most joyful people you would ever meet. Uh, uh, she was an antiques dealer. She was an artist. Uh, uh, she was always interested in unusual or far out things. And we moved across the country, but she always kept this network of friends. And she would go to these gigantic antique shows, and she would see all these people she knew. And she really taught me the value of not only relationships, building relationships and strengthening them and maintaining them, but also just the idea of not wasting time on you should. Here are these arbitrary rules you need to follow. Here are these expectations on you. But let's enjoy these things we have, whether it's social networks or family, or even going somewhere for a good meal or something, you know. And she also loved absurd humor, so she taught me a lot of that.
Oh, what a great mom. And
Yeah.
I gotta ask you, there's one thing that stood out in the Great Santini. If you know, let me know if this is correct. That what is it? Robert Duvall, he wanted to get back at somebody. So he took a can of Campbell's soup, opened it up and put it near his
Cream,
neck, and then fake like he was puking on them.
cream of mushroom. No,
Cream.
he didn't. He didn't. He did that, but the scene there, and within the armed forces, there are all kinds of rivalries. The Navy hates the Air Force, and the Marines hate the Navy, and everybody hates the Army, and all this stuff, right? So it's sort of like college sports, you know. You all hate your rivals. So they were in Europe, I believe in Spain or Italy, and they were at their last port of call on a deployment, and there were a bunch of very, very high ranking and very uptight Navy officers in this restaurant, and there were a bunch of Marines that were just, you know, very, very, very good pilots, but also renegades and rogues. And he was seeking to essentially disrupt the whole thing and blow the lid off of any sense of decorum and show the Navy officers for their uptight selves, and it worked
Yeah,
very spectacularly.
really good. I'm glad you described it. Okay, outside your immediate family, any buddy who had an impact on you?
A person who did, when I was in middle school, I lived in North Florida, um, and I was part of this program that was called the Gifted Program. You know, many schools have, and they go by different names. Um, Essentially for students who are more academically advanced than others. And for 3 years, I had a teacher within this program. His name was David Neal. He was a New Englander, and one of the things I remember in seventh grade, he had the class write a script, act, and shoot an 8 millimeter movie. Okay, this is
Wow.
the kind of things we did in this class. And he taught us critical thinking. He taught us cross-cultural stuff. Like there was something going around in the 70s called the Black IQ test. And he would ask questions. You know, it was essentially designed to show people who do good on standardized tests, and they say, hey, the non-white kids must not be that smart. It's like, well, what kind of questions are you asking them? Could you pass a black IQ test, for example? This is the kind of stuff he was putting in our way, you know. So we would just like, hey, what do you do with this? But one of the things he did, we were to read a biography of someone, and the topic was heroes. Who is your hero? Who is your hero? And read a biography of a hero, and tell me what you thought of the biography, and tell me why you thought this person was a hero. And I read the biography of Jackie Robinson. You know, why did a 12-year-old white kid in North Florida read the biography of Jackie Robinson? Because I heard he was a great baseball player. This was the mid to late 1970s, so his name was still around in a lot of baseball lore. And what that book showed me was just the unthinkable things that happened to black people in this country. I mean, the book opens with a black minor league player in a hotel in a different city and being kicked out of the hotel and trying to scratch his skin off because it's black and he thinks there's white underneath. This is the terror that I was. So that the things that I learned from in David Neal's class in the 1970s, you know, they had a great effect on me, but they probably changed my course. You know, it's like the asteroid. The asteroid's going this way, something hits it, suddenly it's going this way, and you know, decades later, it's in a completely different place. So he introduced me to a lot that I'm sure has had a great effect on me.
Really well put, Keith. You're really articulate, and I'm really getting what you're saying. I appreciate that. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
No, and yes. The military in general, church is a part of the culture, and it has churches, but it says like on a Navy base, there was a church, but you know what branch is it? It's non-denominational. What that mostly means is Protestant, you know, garden variety Protestant. So my mother's family was pretty religious. My dad's family, you know, they were God-fearing Southern people, but they didn't go to church regularly. So the short answer is no, but I did have experience in religions because I moved a lot. I went to a Catholic school for half a year in high school, and I went to Baptist school for a full year in high school. And I didn't like much of what I saw in organized religion in the mid to late 1980s in California. There was a branch of Catholicism that was very interested in social justice and very interested in essentially reforming the church, right? That I don't know what that vaporized at some point. I'm not sure what happened to it, but that was the only. Oh, but I also hung around with Jewish kids when I was in college, and I got the most warm welcome from their families. I went to a Seder dinner with one of my friends, and it was just the most joyous thing I'd been to. You know, it was just great. It was a celebration, and they were so-called conservative Jews, as opposed to, you know, which actually means probably more liberal-minded, but you know, as opposed to Orthodox or Hasidic. But and then later on, through my own discovery, my own readings and wanderings, I've came across Shambhala Buddhism, which I would consider myself a Buddhist.
I see. Do you pray?
I don't, but I do something that might be seen as an equivalent. Buddhists don't pray per se. The Buddhist idea is that we all have a God within us. So when I have a difficulty or something, when my life's in a certain way, I go within and I try to reach the God within, right? And this is what meditation is about. I've not been that good at traditional kind of meditating, but I do a lot of meditative things. That's one of the things art does for me: visual art, painting, and sculpture. And now I'm starting to feel that with music. I do meditative things, and if I do it in a certain way and I do it often enough, it gets me to this point where I can feel the connection with everything, right? I can feel a connection to everything and everyone who's ever existed, right? And this is just the most profound thing. So rewind back when I was a kid, you know, if something's not going right, you pray. Well, I tried that when I was young. I'm like, it's a dark ceiling. I don't have a sense that anybody's here. I don't get a sense that I'm connected to anything. What the heck is this all about? But through these meditative things, and you know, you find out things about yourself, and also it's uncanny. I call it turning on my metaphysical light.
Yeah.
When I'm in this state and I do these things on a regular basis, suddenly I'm having chance meetings with people who turn out to be very important, or show me or tell me things. It's like the Joseph Campbell collection, Reflections on the Art of Living. He talks about going somewhere and reaching for a book. I don't remember if it was a bookstore or a library or what, but he reached randomly for a book and it changed his life.
Yeah.
Right? I don't remember what the book was, but these things happen when I'm in this state. It's like I'm tuned into a universal wavelength, you know, and my unconscious mind or whatever can sense things and guides me toward them. So no, I don't pray, but I do that.
Really, really well put. Again, you really communicate clearly to me. I appreciate that. In fact,
Thanks.
it evoked Paul Krasner's joke. The two little league baseball players, one's at bat and the other one's pitching, and the batter goes, "Please God, let me hit a home run," and the pitcher goes, "Please God, let me strike him out." And the clouds part and God's voice comes through and he goes, "You superstitious fools."
I have one for you. What did the Buddhists say to the hot dog vendor?
Make me one with everything.
You heard that one. You've heard
I love that one. My wife wrote a song out of that great line.
Oh, that's great.
So in that regard, it's stupid, but if God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Congratulations. You treated life seriously, but you didn't take it too seriously.
Oh my God, that is really good. Okay. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I would lean toward the former, and I'll explain that. I believe that anyone has the capability of good or so-called evil behavior. Evil is sometimes a matter of relative positions, but sometimes it's just bad. It's just bad things. And I think when someone, and I'm not talking about diagnosable chemical mental conditions like psychopathy, sociopathy. Those are things. People who suffer from that, as I understand it, have something different in their minds, and that they're not on the same field as we are. But for those who are, I believe when someone is doing something evil, it speaks to a profound imbalance inside oneself. There's a saying. It allegedly comes from a Native American axiom or lesson. It's the kid asking. It's a kid asking his grandfather. There's something about wolves going crazy and another benevolent thing that the grandfather points out is inside all of us. And the kid says, well, what's the best course of action, or which one wins? And the grandfather's answer is whichever one you let.
Yeah.
Whichever one you welcome in. So,
yeah.
And this can happen on individual levels, but also group levels. A Jungian psychologist named James Hollis wrote a book called When Good People Do Bad Things, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And the title could be better, but it talks about the shadow, and it talks about the shadow being activated in individuals, but also in companies, in nations, in religions. So if enough people, if someone or someone's activates a bad idea, here's something inside me or you or anybody that might not be activated, but now it is, and it builds power, right?
Yep.
So, yeah,
No,
I
that
don't.
was good because we'll get into it now with a couple other follow-up questions. Really good. I love that wolf story, and I'm going to look into the hollows because I actually attend a Carl Jung reading group, and it's amazing. So, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I'm going to set it up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, "If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them." Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Closer.
JFK said, "Forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name." And Fellini says, "I need an enemy." So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, Keith, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, I would say it surprises me and doesn't surprise me that Watts wrote that. Um, uh, if you acknowledge your enemy as an enemy,
Yeah.
then yes, you empower that enemy. It doesn't necessarily mean the enemy gains power. It means that in relation to you, this enemy has power because you're on the warpath, or whatever the metaphor would be. However, if you acknowledge your enemy as a human, that changes things. For example, there's a writer from, I think, New Jersey, named Lodro Rinsler. He wrote a book. He's written several books. He wrote a book called "The Buddha Walks into a Bar,"
Yeah.
and it's basically taking Buddhist principles and saying, well, how are these relevant today? How is this relevant to, hey, I want to have a drink. What would the Buddha say about that? In fact, he used to write a column called "What Would Sid Do?" and like Siddhartha, what would
Yeah.
Sid do? At any rate, in one of his books, he says that he didn't originate this, but there's a Buddhist principle that says if someone insults you, pay that person a compliment.
Yeah.
And I've done that before, and it really changes things. It changes dynamics. And so, if you're talking about enemy, okay, there's someone trying to kill you. Okay, that doesn't apply here. But if you're talking about in social situations and work situations, community situations, if you acknowledge that person as an enemy, it does empower that person. But if you acknowledge that person as a human, it changes. So I would say, again, perseverance and patience instead of let's put on the gloves.
PAP, perseverance and patience. That's a great mantra. And it really, excuse me, what you said was similar to McLuhan says, carefully make plans, then do the opposite.
Yeah.
If someone insults you, like, I can over insult you or whop you upside the head or whatever. But man, you kill them with kindness. But here's a Nassim Taleb said this quote: games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, you don't know who really won or lost, but you can tell who is a hero and who is not. So it's a fun quote. He covers a lot. But when I said it to someone, they said, well, villains don't think they are bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. So any thoughts on that? I could just ask the question too, does punishment work? So if you're here, if you catch your enemy or you catch the villain, does punishment work?
Well, first I'll take on
Yeah,
the hero thing.
yeah,
A hero is not synonymous with the victor.
yeah,
Um, you think about the archetypal hero. They're often, when they come back to society with exactly what society needs, they're often shunned, right? But they
yeah.
do it nonetheless because they do the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing. So I would argue that type of hero does not want freedom. That type of hero wants what is best for the greater good.
Right.
And that person knows whether he or she is the one to do it, right? Um,
Well, wait, let's before you go into the punishment thing, I got to work out a question there. What I should say is maybe the Talib question, then tell the one person's reaction because I like that differentiating. Villains don't think they're bad, they want control. Heroes want freedom. Then I could ask the question, what's the function of heroism?
yeah,
That because then you answered, let me talk about heroes before I layered it with this other question and went off tangent with punishment. Because see, with punishment, I like it because it's Gregory Bates and the anthropologist says, like, when you when a criminal gets caught, they don't necessarily think they're doing something morally wrong. They just think their criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day. That's, so you don't know what. So then it's like, well, what's what does punishment work? Because that's what we think we have to do usually.
yeah. Well, it depends on the context. If you're talking about, this sounds like it's leaning toward criminal justice, and um, I would say in this nation, criminal justice punishment by and large does not work
Yeah.
because think about what happens to you if you are convicted of a felony and sent to even prison for even a short time. In many states you can't vote. In many states you cannot qualify for Section 8 housing. In many states you are obligated to say that to reveal that to a potential employer, right? So you can't get a place to you can't get student loans. So once you've been convicted of a felony, what choices do you have besides going back to that life of crime? A a person I knew in college did a research project on prisons in Japan, and after he told me about this, I did research. I went to the library at Cal Berkeley and looked for stuff. I couldn't find anything on this, but I didn't see his project. But he told me that in Japan, and I'm not saying this is true. I'm just saying what I was told. But it proves a point, even if it's hypothetical, that the prisons in Japan are designed to bring in the offender and say, here's what you did, and here's why it runs counter to a productive society. We're going to teach you a skill. We're going to, do this or that or whatever we have to do. Then when you go out into the world, you can start over. You can be, again, part of society rather than you can't vote, you can't get a student loan,
Right.
you have to, so this country is so moralistic in its criminal justice system, and their moral is a relative thing again. It's like if you make a mistake, that's it. Forget it. And the people who are behind that type of thinking believe it will act as a deterrent toward others. And I can't think of anything that has shown that's the case. Oh, and also in Japan, I don't know what the recidivism rate is overall in this country, but it's pretty high. In Japan, it was something like 30%. So it was dramatically lower. So again, I couldn't back up that research, so I can't speak to its veracity. But even the idea, if one had a criminal justice system like that, punishment could work.
Yeah. In essence, it almost reflects her the Asian approach or the Eastern approach to medicine. In the West, we go to our doctor and say, give me a cure.
Yeah. Right.
And there is no cure, but this, they don't even say this. Here's a remedy. They just, we expect them. Okay, I have an infection. Give me an antibiotic. Okay, it will go away. Go away. In the East, you are taught how to maintain your body. You
Yeah.
taught maintenance over this thing called cure or remedy.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So it's similar. Like we want to reform in jails, but it's turned into the military prison industrial complex. And it's
Absolutely. Yeah. It has. You know, I lived in or near Oakland for many years, and you know, there was such a problem. And when Jerry Brown was mayor there, he identified this problem with parolees. And you know, what can you do with people who come out of prison and they don't have any alternative, and they're committing crimes again, because it is the one avenue that's still open to them.
yeah. Yeah. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, Joyce, of all people, should know the power of story, right? Power of story, the power of illustration. And for example, you know, let's say there's a tree across the street from where you live. You walk past that tree every day, every 2 days, every 3 days, whatever. You don't see that tree anymore, right? You go into a movie theater and you see the same tree that a filmmaker's done something unusual with. Suddenly you're seeing that tree in a different way, right? Or take a novel or a painting. You have in a novel or a film, you have a storyline, you have an arc, you have a conflict, you have and a resolution. These are small illustrations of life, small things that depict life. They teach us lessons. We see ourselves in them. We see people we know in them. We see people we don't like in them, whatever. When an artwork is done well, it's like a myth. It's like, and I don't mean myth like a lie. I mean a myth like a teaching, you know, something that is archetypal, that, you know, and it's like in a painting, if you have a full color palette and a brilliant use of space, you can see something that you would not have seen outside. You can see something that you would not have seen except through this lens, this projection, right? So it's also what it speaks to self-awareness. And you know, sometimes I'm jealous of my cat, because I just like, hey Thomas, can you go to work for me? You know, it's just like, can you go get the car fixed? You know, can you fix that thing on my bicycle for me that's giving me a hard time? He doesn't have to think about that. He's just a cat, right? And so, but we have self-awareness, and because of that, I think art, telling stories, is what it's all about.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, Keith, you've done a lot. I mean, basically, let's say you're a reporter journalist and you're a creative person in art. Let's say, you know, two things. You're a creative person and you're a journalist. So, what's the tipping point when you go, I'm going to pursue journalism? And then what's the tipping point when you're like, I'm going to pursue making art? Did you grow up, like, in other words, you grow up, your mom did. She was exposing you to art. So you knew that.
Yeah. And
How,
also crafts, and she
yeah,
refinished
right,
furniture and things like that. Yeah.
right. Antique crafts.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're that so where's that tipping point? Did you go, I'm going to go to college and pursue journalism and art? You know, where's your tipping point? Like, that's my path. The word I used to say, "What's your career?" And just last week, I thought maybe I should ask, "What's your vocation?"
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is something that I've spent a great deal of time thinking about and sometimes struggling with. Um, when I was young, I I learned to read and fool around with letter blocks when I was pretty young. But I also loved art. I also loved making things. I loved drawing things. I loved building things. And what I found was both writing and art when I was young. I was in an absurd situation. Even if I hadn't grown up under the great Santini, growing up as a military kid is a phenomenally weird thing. A woman, I've got her name written down here because I can never remember it. Mary Edwards Wertsch, Wertsch. She wrote a book in the early 90s called Military Brats. She is a friend, well, was, because I believe he died, a friend of Pat Conroy.
Yeah.
And she was a reporter, I think, for the Washington Post. And she was a military kid too, as was Conroy. And after she saw the great Santini with Pat Conroy at a premiere, she said, "I can't wait to get into all the research that's been done about military families." And she found that there had been none. So she did an exhaustive series of interviews with 80 people who had grown up in military families and interviewed them as adults. So, it's this secret tribe that that is never really even self-acknowledged. And I suspect there's been more research done since she wrote her book, but it's a phenomenally weird thing. You move all the time. And if you've ever seen any military, like squadron symbols and things like that, they're these cartoon representation of terror and death, right? I mean, one of my favorite, I love Felix the cat. Okay, when I was a kid,
Yeah.
I love Felix. One of the squadron symbols is Felix the cat carrying a bomb. Right? He's running towards someone. He's going to bomb someone. So this is the kind of stuff you're surrounded with when you're a kid. And you're like, oh, I'm going to be normal. I'm going to be whatever. And you live on base, and there are these massive weapon systems and these huge aircraft carriers and stuff. Right? So and you move a lot. And I had the great Santini to deal with. Right? So
Yeah.
writing and art were a way for me to tell my story, a way for
Yeah.
me to figure things out. And we had a family farm my family had a farm in Tennessee. It's where my uncle lived, where I rode in that Mustang. And I spent a couple of summers there with my brother, and I used to just collect junk, and I would build things out of this junk, right? And then I learned to draw, and then I learned to paint. And so these were ways of telling my story, right? So when I got to college, a tipping point happened my second semester in college. I took my first drawing class, and I loved my teacher, and I loved what I was feeling. I loved what I could do. And not long after that, I became an art major. I did that for a couple of years, but I was still early-ish in the undergrad process, so I hadn't done everything to fulfill that major, and I got a little disillusioned because for a number of reasons. It was internal as well as external, and I'm like, I need something that sort of speaks to me more, and that I can see more of a future when I get out of school, because an unfortunate thing about the fine arts department where I went to college, San Francisco State, at the time, it had zero classes about business, right? About how to make a living at this, right? Zero, none, never even mentioned, right? So I had started off as an English major, but I didn't, it was my first year, so I was just taking, lower division classes anyway, right? So I'm like, you know what? Maybe English fits me better, right? So I walk past the journalism department, and I see this flyer, and it talks about all these things you can do as a journalist. You can learn about this, you can learn about that. You can be resourceful, you can be part of a team, you can be on deadline, you can have this essentially not that well paid unless you're in television, but this really exciting life, right? And you can use these skills. I'm just like, hell yeah, that's what I want to do, right? So, but so that was a tipping point for journaling, and it's something I had considered already because I love to write, and I love to tell stories. So, but over the course, probably for the next, probably for a good, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years, I was like, am I a word person? Am I a picture person? Am I a journalist? Am I an artist? I got to be one. I can't be both, right? It was just conflict, right? And then when I was in my late 20s, I started painting again, and I could not believe it. It just blew the lid off my soul, sent me into the stratosphere, right? I had some of these experiences I talked about feeling connected to the whole universe, right? So then I'm like, well, I don't have to do it for a living, but this can be, I started getting work shown, and I started getting into galleries, and then I was a member of this cooperative gallery, right? And it was just phenomenal. So that was another tipping point in my late 20s when I came back to it and said, hell yeah, I can do this, right? I can be a journalist, So, and now I'm doing music, So.
That's good. And so when you're painting, let's start there. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're painting your painting or making your art, making a piece of art?
Well, it depends on whether the intention is internal or external. Are you talking about an external intention, like this is what I want someone to see?
Well, that's interesting because you put the question in the context you want, because the follow-up question is what you implied there is Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. What role does the audience play in your creative process when you're painting your painting? Are you thinking of your viewer when you're painting your painting?
I am no, but yes.
Yeah.
The best work I have ever done, I did it because I really felt like I had to do it. I didn't have a choice. This is coming through me. This is coming through me. I need to get it out, right? This is, I don't know, cathartic or
Yeah.
whatever, however you want to put it. I think about the audience in that I know what I want to do visually. Can this person, for example, will a person be able to tell whether this is the moon? Because if somebody looks at that and doesn't know what it is, it will not convey anything.
Yeah.
It will convey I saw what he was trying to do there, but it didn't quite work, right? So in that regard, I think about the audience. However, the things that I paint, some of them are around me. You can see them in the background. They're intentionally contradictory sometimes. They are intentionally confusing. They're disquieting without being like, gory and in your face. So what I believe is when I create a work, I know what it means to me. I know what it feels like to me. Whatever anybody else sees in it, whatever anybody else feels, whatever conclusions they draw from it are perfectly valid. One of the most, like for example, when I was in this cooperative gallery, I lived for a year in Lincoln, Nebraska, and was in a cooperative gallery in Omaha. And people, when I had an exhibition there, people would come in and say, and this was my first time having an exhibition. People would say, "What does this mean?" And I would say, "What do you think? What does it mean to you?"
Yeah.
And sometimes they would love that question. Sometimes they would hate it.
Yeah.
But I put things in my paintings that, to me, they are designed to evoke questions. They're not designed to say, I meant this socio-political point and this whatever point, and that's what you need to get. If you don't see any of that, to me, that is fine.
Yeah.
Because Joseph Campbell talked about art as it's like a signpost, right?
Yeah.
You can periodically inhabit this this eternal kind of sense, right? And you know this in your lizard brain and in your heart. You can't put it into words, but when you see a good work of art that speaks to you, you're like, I know that. I know
Yeah.
what it means. And it points to something that you can't quite get to, and you can't quite put it into words. So to me, that's what I want my art to do. I want people to see in that. I mean, I once had somebody say, I love your work. I would never want it in my house. And I'm like, like
That's
that.
that's what when I first started looking at Diane Arbus photographs, I go,
Oh,
these
yeah.
are amazing, but I
Yes.
don't want one in my house. But I had that one clip uh still of the kid holding the grenade for
Yeah.
years stuffed in a corner somewhere. So I
Yeah.
really contradicted myself. I was like, so two of my film heroes have a mantra that goes like this. George Manupelli says, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says, there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor, jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. So I know it's both and it depends, but just your feelings on this. Is art making more self-expression or more your vehicle for whatever technology, cultures, and environments are dominant?
When one is young or beginning in a certain medium, I believe there is a desire to say, look at me, look at what I can do, look at me, right? And that would be self-expression. That would be ego.
Yeah.
Not all ego, but look at me, look at what I can do. As one develops and one gets more comfortable in one's medium, this could be anything. It could be visual art, it could be writing, it could be music, it could be spoken word uh, performance. One gets a little looser and more comfortable and can sort of push boundaries. And I think at that point, this is what happened to me with painting when I was in my 20s. I wrote to a friend of mine one night. I worked a night shift in the newspaper, and I used to paint until the sun came up. I had a studio at one point, and when I got home, I wrote to a friend of mine, and I said, I don't feel like this is me. I feel like something's coming to me from the universe, and it's
Wow.
coming through me, right? So that is completely without self-expression. I'm a vehicle,
Yeah. That's heavy. Can art making be egoless?
I think it can, and I think the best artwork is includes as little ego as possible. In fact, The Residents, as you know, the theory of obscurity. Of course, it was sort of an inside joke a long time. People really know who they were, at least two of the two remaining ones, and and whatnot. But that theory of obscurity is an artist does his or her best work if people don't know their identity, right?
Exactly.
But because there's no pressure to be like, oh, I wonder if they're going to like it, and I wonder if I should change
Yeah.
this. The singer of Butthole Surfers, I don't remember his name.
Gibby.
Yeah, I read something about him early in that band's life. He wanted to change the band's name every time it played because he didn't want people to have any expectations, and he wanted to blow their minds and not know who they were. I'm like, that's admirable. That is cool.
Oh, that is great. I want to interview him. He called up the Zappa hotline when I worked there, and he goes, why are Frank's cassettes on the shelf in my record store and ours aren't? I went, duh. Did you ever think it's the name? And they could sell out any venue in America. They
Yeah,
were a touring band.
yeah,
No, that is great. He wanted to change the name every time. That's like if McLuhan had if he was alive, he'd have a website, but he wouldn't tell you the URL.
yeah. Right. Exactly. Yes.
You have a website? Yeah, but
Yeah,
you can't see it.
yeah.
Yeah. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Of the two, I say conviction, and um, In terms of compromise, though, compromise is many people see that word and they have bad connotations. It has bad connotations, and I can understand that. If someone wants you to give something or sacrifice something you don't feel like you should, and you call that compromise, that's not good. But there's another type of compromise, though. A Buddhist way of thinking, one thing you consider is what is best for everyone in the group, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have convictions and it's my way or the highway and it's absolute this and or nothing, you might get everything you want, but you might hurt people and not, ill-gotten gains, that idea. You might not live the values you once tried to embrace. But if you, again, with some patience and some perseverance, and also with some communication, compromise could be more like diplomacy. I learned this a lot as an editor when I was editing stories of reporters who were really, really good, but their stories needed changing or needed another element they didn't have. I learned to be this kind of diplomat, so that could anyone claim total victory? No, but was everyone pretty okay with? So yeah, that's a way to. But without conviction, you wouldn't know how to do that dance. You wouldn't know what's putting you there.
Keith, T.S. Eliot said poetry's outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Oh my Lord. I would say the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote.
Oh my God. That's, I have on my wall right over there his business card. Have brains, will travel. That is the best answer I ever got. That's so cool. Yeah, my friend Rob Clampett, his dad did some of those.
Oh wow. Oh yeah, right. Clampett, right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Is perception reality?
I'll say yes, but there's a big parentheses. When it's a bunch of people believing some of the nonsense that's going around in this country now without any hard evidence to back it up, then no.
Yeah. That's pretty good. Tell me one major element of your creativeness that's stayed the same in your years doing it, and one major element that's changed.
As paradoxical as it might sound, one of the things that has stayed the same is my sense of curiosity, and what that's led me to is to do different things. I talked about the battle between the word person and the picture person.
Yeah.
When I was working in San Francisco, when I met you, I was doing previews for this storytelling series, and the guy who produced it said, "We're doing one for people who work in the news business. Do you want to do this?" And I said, "Yeah." Get on stage. Never done it. So I made up a story. I didn't make it up. They needed to be things that really happened. But I thought of this really fabulously entertaining story that I had about when I was an editor, and so I got on stage, right? And I did a little more of that. A friend of mine from college, she put something on in Southern California called CatCon. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's billed as like Comic Con, but for cat people. Yeah. And so when I worked at the cat magazine, Catster, she said, "Hey, do you want to be the MC? Because we're going to have a bunch of stage people. We're going to have these cat celebrities and some music and a fashion contest and all this stuff, right? Do you want to be the MC?" I'm just like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" So I work with the stage crew. I wrote intros and outros and helped stage manage and stuff. And, now I'm, the last year and a half, I've been learning music, right? So this undying curiosity, what has stayed the same is that I'm continuing to try new things. What has changed is, as I said earlier in my life, I felt a need to identify what is my true self, what is my true calling, what is my, I'm a painter, I'm a writer, I'm a painter, I'm a writer, I'm a painter and a writer, now I'm a painter and a writer and a spoken word guy and an MC and a musician in training and, who knows what else, so that I've given up that fight because it doesn't, I am what I am and I am who I am, and my true self is that I want to do a lot of things.
It's beautiful. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Well, I have a number of examples, and some of them run the course of my whole life, but I'll highlight one. There's a Buddhist concept of when you come to an obstacle, don't consider it an obstacle, consider it a catalyst.
Yeah.
What you need to do to navigate that obstacle will transform you and turn you into whatever you will be on the other side of this obstacle, right?
Yeah.
And that could be a huge thing, or it could be a not so huge thing. So a situation that I was in, or again around the time that I met you in San Francisco, I had I went to San Francisco State for college in the late 1980s, and I had reestablished contact with the department there. So when I was at SF Weekly, I reached out to the department and told them that I was interested in hiring interns to come help at the paper. And I had an assistant editor at the time who had been at the paper for probably 10 or 12 years, and she had a phenomenal amount of connections, and she had overseen interns before. But the day the first intern showed up, she got laid off.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, oh man, I feel fine about taking credit for starting this program, but I don't know how to do this, right? So I decided to just face that, right? And say, because over the course of my life, people have told me, you'd be a good teacher, why don't you think about being a college instructor, or writing instructor, or art instructor, or something. I'm like, well, okay, maybe I'm a good teacher. And what I found was it was one of the most rewarding things, the rewarding parts about that job. It was unbelievable, because what I started remembering were the people who had taught me, whether it was art or journalism, any kind of writing. I still had voices in my head that were, decades old, and I could hear them because they had come to me so early. And some of them were words of encouragement, and some of them were just, hey, you ought to look out for this. So, that was, 10 years ago. I'm still in touch. I think I oversaw 4, maybe 5 interns, and I'm still in touch with almost all of them. So I can't remember whether, I think it was about the coronavirus. It was either 2020 or 2021. I'm watching Rachel Maddow, okay,
Yeah.
on MSNBC. And on walks one of my former interns. She's writing for Politico or something. I'm like,
Right.
holy Toledo, look at this. And she was such a good worker, and such a good writer, and so curious. I'm like, man, you're going to go far. And so I actually recently, one intern recently contacted me, and she wanted to have a video call with me just to ask me some kind of career advice and stuff. And as an aside in that conversation, she said, I remember I was writing a story once, and I gave it to you and you walked over to me and you said to me, that is a dynamite lead. You just nailed this. And she goes, I still remember that. I still remember that. So I'm just like, okay, great. I'm able to do for people what people did for me, which is, this has become like a theme of my life. I remember people, personal hard times, professional hard times, whatever. Whenever someone asks for help, I give all I can, because I'm putting it back into the system, you know?
Yeah, that was well done. I love that obstacle as a catalyst, because that's we call it in McLuhan world. To how do you turn a breakdown into a breakthrough,
Yeah.
or a rejection into a redirection?
Yes. Right. Right.
So, Keith, I asked for 90 minutes and we got 5 more. Can you go a little more, or you got to leave in
Oh,
5?
no, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we'll do a few more then. Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
When you don't let it lead you.
Yeah. Can satire be destructive? I asked my friend, he wrote comedy for Robin Williams. He said, that's the job of satire. But if you do a cartoon in a certain country and they kill you, some people think death is destructive. Swift compared satire to a mirror in which people could see every face but their own. What's the function of satire? I know you love puns. What's the
Yeah, I
fun?
do.
Yeah, that's satire. What's the function of satire?
Satire, and I believe comedy in general, and this is definitely true of satire. When I was in college at San Francisco State, that's when San Francisco was an incubator for comics. On a local level, you could still see Bob Goldthwait, Rob Schneider, Robin Williams would drop in sometimes unexpectedly, and so a roommate and a girlfriend of mine, a girlfriend who was the daughter of underground comics artist Dan O'Neill, by the way. Um, uh, they knew stand-up comedians, and I used to go see a lot of stand-up comedy, and that paid off when I was at SF Weekly, because I covered comedy a lot. And comedy to me, and this is true of satire also, satire is a way of speaking truth to power.
Yeah.
Whether it's destructive, and comedians, to me, stand-up comedians are God's chosen people, because they work hard, they don't get paid well, and they get punched in the face when they tell the truth. You know, they get punished for the good things they bring to us, right? Not always, not 100% of the time, but it's part of what comes with it. But is it damaging? It could be, but sometimes damage is a good thing. Like the thing that happened to Charlie Hebdo, that was terrible. That was awful. That was brutal. You know, gunning down satirists for what they'd done. But I think that also speaks to its power, you know, because it is, you can say things as a comedian that you can't say as a reporter, as even an opinion columnist. You can put things in a way that exposes truth, and people can laugh and recognize it in ways you can't do otherwise.
Dude, you have ESP, because the next question is, you create what you resist. That's a saying. Bob Goldthwait morphed it into you are what you hate. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve.
Mm-hmm.
And Louis Buñuel said, thank God I'm an atheist. So, I mean, just your thoughts, Keith, on this. I'm not saying you, but one creates what one resists. You create what you resist. What's your thoughts on that idea?
Well, I don't know. I'm looking up at my wall right here and seeing a pretty good example of that. As I told you, I grew up under the Great Santini, and I'm looking at a painting called The Aviator. It's a big tombstone-like thing with a bust on the top of it, and the bust is a skeleton. And there are Navy plaques on it. There's a bottle of gin. There's a handgun. There's a NATO symbol, and there's a big lipstick kiss on it, right? So this is what I grew up under, and it's what I created, right? So
Right.
but Pema Chodron, a
Yeah,
Shambhala Buddhist, what she says, you're obsessed with your dad, you're obsessed with whatever one might say. But what she would say is, well, this is your work.
yeah,
This is your work. This is what you get to deal with, and this is your education. This is your
yeah,
way to develop yourself spiritually and to embrace the values that you want to live. You
yeah.
know,
That's really, really beautiful. How do you find peace of mind?
how do I find peace of mind? Well, I think it's what I described earlier when you asked me the prayer question. Um, the kind of when I'm dialed in, as I put it, uh, when I do these meditative things and when I write regularly and I tend to creative efforts regularly, I get this sense of clarity where it's not necessarily happy or everything's good, but everything's perfect. Everything's just as it should be. The good, the bad. I can see it all. So it's sort of a long range kind of thing because this kind of state oftentimes takes at least a week or two to get into, and I need to be pretty disciplined about what I do, and I don't always do that, but that's how I get there.
Again, it's well articulated, Keith. I understood what you said. Can you forget to die?
Can I forget to die? Wow, that's a that's a brilliant thing. I don't know. I hope so, but I also hope not.
That's a great answer. Um, that goes along with this. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Chastity.
Oh my God. That's funny because it's good. You never had it and you never want it. Somebody said immortality. So we don't know if immortality is good or not, but they're
Yeah,
assuming that it's
right.
good
Yeah.
to live forever. Never had it, never want it. That's very interesting. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
I'd say, kid, let's go get a cup of coffee. I got a lot to tell you about. But what I would say, and considering that a 12-year-old would be able to grasp only so much at that stage of development, I would probably say what I said to a friend's daughter before she left for college a couple of years ago. Essentially, what I told her was, and she was showing a phenomenal creative spirit and just doing these drawings and paintings that were unbelievable. But that's not what she was going to pursue in college. I told her, hold on to your creative spirit, hold on to your sense of self inquiry and wonder, because in the bad times it will save you, and in the good times it will send you into the stratosphere.
Yeah, it's good. Good advice. I love that. Of 5 Alan Watts questions, just off the top of your head, in a few words. 1, who started it all?
The god and goddess.
Are we going to make it?
Yes.
Where do we put it?
Where it fits.
Who's cleaning it up?
Everyone.
Is it serious?
No, but that doesn't mean we can't laugh at it.
I love Gurdjieff says the function of laughter is the reconciliation of yes and no.
And I need to edit that answer. Yes, it's serious, but we can still laugh at it. I didn't mean no,
But
it's
we
not.
can still laugh at it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's serious, but you can still laugh at it. And yes, the yes and no, right? Yes, that
Yeah.
is.
Well,
That
it's
is brilliant.
also Frank Zappa said, I'm very serious about being not serious.
Right.
It's really embracing contradiction. Yeah.
It is. I love it. De said, "And what am I to love if not a paradox?"
Who said that?
Giorgio de the elder statesman of the surrealists. What am I to love if not a paradox?
That's good. I like him a lot. That's a good one. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, because McLuhan loves Steve Allen's. Behind every joke, there's a grievance.
there's a
Now,
great. Yeah,
yeah, I don't like the word every, but behind jokes,
yeah,
there's grievances.
yeah.
Might be, yeah. Just a few more and we're out of here. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll? Over or under?
Over.
Why?
I find it more aesthetically pleasing.
Well, the patent over 100 years old has it going over. But
Oh,
you, Keith, you should hear the people, and it's 95% say over. The
oh, no
5
kidding.
the 5% who say under, they have their reasons.
Yeah.
If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Tales of a high-powered mutant.
They want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell?
Rye whiskey.
Nice. If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Oh, I'm trying to think of some of the places that I've thought of as like the spiritual centers of my universe, places where I've had phenomenal experiences. One of them is Mendocino County, the city of Fort Bragg, California.
I
Uh,
know it. Yes.
yeah, yeah. It would be erected on a, a cliff around Fort Bragg, and it would be made of. It would be a beautiful construction of mannequins, scrap metal, and broken glass.
All right. That's like Keenholz meets Watts Towers.
Yeah.
If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Call my fucking lawyer.
That is a good answer. I have not had that answer. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
Well, I've been reading over the past since the stay-at-home order started in March of 2020. There's a movement, and it's not necessarily the so-called Great Resignation, but people young and old, because they've worked from home and because they have been able to do things working from home they've not been able to do otherwise. There is a sense of people, I think, earlier in life realizing that there is nothing honorable or noble about giving too much of yourself to a job, and that you're a person outside of your vocation.
Yeah.
And you're a person, vocation as opposed to avocation. I think avocation is follow your heart, and vocation is what you do for money, if I remember correctly. But essentially, don't be a slave to your career. And I believe that people are realizing this, like I said, young and old, but I think people are, it might become the norm, because it took me a long time to figure that out. When I was young and first working in newspapers, I was getting paid hourly, and I used to work all this overtime and not report it, because I thought I'm a tough guy. I can do this. I want to do it. I love what I'm doing. Well, it doesn't end in a happy place.
Yeah. So Thornton Wilder wrote 28 confession, art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. Keith, you've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
Creatively speaking.
Yeah, again, you put it in the
Okay.
context. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I see. Even my career I see as creative, and the other things I've mentioned that are very important to me are uh, spoken word, stage stuff, and in that context, this is where I'll choose to put it. It's about simultaneously using these things to figure out my life and to figure out the world and the universe around me, and sharing them with people so that they might be able to use them to figure out the world around them and tell their own story.
Yeah. Love it. So good, Keith. What gives you the most optimism?
Well, considering there are a lot of reasons not to be optimistic these days, I would say love, love, and in a word, love, because love is a radical act. Love is a radical act, especially today.
Yeah.
Uh, and expounding on that a little bit, the world's been through hard times before, and people have come together, and the wrong side has ruled for a long time at times, and the right side has come back. Um, I'm doing what I can in terms of my own community and involvement in people I know and people I live near, to essentially put out there that we can take care of one another,
Yeah.
and that whatever comes along, we can survive and we can thrive if we stick together and use love and compassion as our guide.
Yeah. It's full circle, dude. It's amazing. Eden Abe wrote a song called Nature Boy, and he says, the greatest lesson you'll ever learn is to love and be loved in return.
Yeah.
And the first question was, what's the best thing for a human being? And you said compassion and togetherness.
Mm-hmm.
And I got that from my friend studied Wilhelm Reich, and she said, what's the best thing for a human being is another human being.
Yeah.
And then the last question is what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. They go, what gives you the most optimism? And he said, other people.
Other people.
And so, it's really been fun spending this time with another, the other people. It's rare you get someone who puts that they like the cramps in the residence on their resume.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh,
That's me.
Lux Interior's favorite movie, The World's Greatest Sinner. You know that movie?
No, I don't.
Oh, look it up. It's Timothy Carey. It's sort of known because Zappa did the soundtrack. But Lux Interior, what an amazing creative force. And
Yeah.
just everything, you're so vast, and we cross over so much,
Yeah.
with the Campbell and the Buddhism. But it really has been fun, Keith, because you've got a lot of goodness, and you say it well. You're articulate.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's this thing about accessibility. I have this new question I'm probing about. Is the artist obliged to be accessible? And it's just like in these interviews I do. Are people obliged to be articulate? Well, no. All I'm doing is asking you to air your ideas. But
Mm-hmm.
man, it communicates so much better through the Zoom screen to my ears and my heart when someone can put the words together in a
Yeah.
way that I get it. I mean,
Right.
at least I felt like I got it. I
Yeah.
could be, I could have misinterpreted things, but really that's what it's about, right? If you
Yeah.
feel you
Yeah.
get it.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. One of my favorite journalists who people I respect most is Bill Moyers, and he's so good at that. He
Yep,
is so good at conveying things that otherwise would be uh,
right.
indecipherable, or what have you.
Yep. So I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, but I hope this never ends, Keith, and that
Yes,
we can keep the dialogue going on forever and ever.
absolutely, absolutely. It's been a pleasure, and thank you so